Good evening. Today, for the first time, we are having this unique discussion on Constitution at 75, leading India from freedom and democracy to Viksit Bharat. And we're very honored to have with us the President of India Foundation, Dr. Ram Madhav ji. Please give him a hand. When I was asked by Ram Madhav ji to introduce him, I thought that that's almost like an oxymoron. How can you introduce a person whom everybody knows and everybody knows his qualities? But I'll still do it in 2 minutes. Ram Madhav ji is an Indian politician, social leader, author, and thinker. Apart from being president of the India Foundation, he has been the curator of major global and national multilateral initiatives. Just to name a few, like the Indian Ocean Conference, the Dharma Dhama Conference, etc. In addition, he regularly does what we call in the Foreign Service 1.5 track. And 1.5 track basically means that, let's say you have a difficult relationship with a particular country on a particular issue. So you do back chat channels, and they are conducted amazingly by Ram Madhav ji. I've had the privilege of being to a few. You can do the same also on internal issues on which some venting of, it's like what a famous French thinker told me in Paris once. He said that the difference between democracy and dictatorship is that in a democracy, you must allow the steam to come out of the kettle. And in a dictatorship, you keep it pushed down until it explodes, like the French Revolution of 1789. I think 1.5 track, which is conducted, is an example in that respect. Hello, General Katoch. In addition, Ram Madhav ji has authored several books in English and Telugu, and I would invite you to read all of them. The ones which I have read and really enjoyed as Partition Freedom, The Hindutva Paradigm, etc. We have them all in the Habitat Library also, and I would encourage you all to read some of his books. And as far as strategic thinking is concerned, political philosophy and India's foreign policy, Ram Madhav ji travels widely and is always invited to very significant fora where he gives presentations which are profound in their nature and go back to tracing their origin right down to present times. In today's lecture, which we both of us thought out together, the topic, as indeed he does to guide us on our Parivartan, which is our magazine, which he also always, despite his tight schedule, always finds time to write something for us. We are going to reflect on our Constitution, on the fact that the Constitution at 75 has led India from a colonized state of 188 years to giving back freedom and democracy to its 1 billion or more people who actually, when they were colonized, and that is something that Swami Vivekananda often spoke, how could such a large nation of such intelligent and thinking people have been colonized for so long, given the fact that at any point of time, the British Army in India was never more than 7 to 10,000 individuals. And they controlled the entire country with 7 to 10,000 individuals, which then raises the whole issue of how did they do it? They did it with fellow Indians, which is again a lesson we need to learn. The Constitution of India has kept India united, has kept India free, and now it's time for us to move on. I'd like to conclude these few words by also noting that we often talk about what India can give to the world, and many talk about India giving to the world Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But as I was just discussing with Ram Madhav ji, there is one sentence attached to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which many Indians don't know, which is the world is one family, but only for the generous-hearted. Don't expect those who are not generous in heart to accept Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And finally, I'd like to say that the greatness of India at 75 is that our constitution is 75 years old, but India, that is Bharat, existed for thousands of years. Those who try to question that it was the Brits who made Bharat, that is India, I would invite them to read from our ancient books. For instance, the Vishnu Purana, which says, the land that lies north of the ocean and south of the snowy mountains is called Bharat, where the descendants of Bharat dwell. And Article 1 of the Constitution carries that forward by saying, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. That could not have been possible if we had not been a nation for millennia. Finally, we are not a colonizing race, but after colonization, we realized that the colonizers tried to destroy our civilization, our history. They tried to destroy our confidence in ourselves. And remnants of that colonization still exists in the minds and hearts of many of us, which must be vanquished now that we have done 75 years of a proud republic. And Swami Vivekananda always said that we are not a colonizing nation. India for thousands of years peacefully existed, even earlier, when history had no record, and tradition dared not peer into the gloom of that intense past. Even from then until now, idea after idea has marched out from her, but every word has been spoken with a blessing behind it and peace before it. And that is what our great country offers to the world. Jai Hind. I would like to request Ram Madhav ji to come to the podium. Please give it a hand. Thank you.
Namaskar and good evening to everybody. Namaskar, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee ji, for your kind introduction and beautiful words in the beginning to set the tone for today's session on Constitution at 75. I don't have to mention it again that we have entered 75th year as a republic. 75 years ago, on 26 January 1950, we adopted the Constitution which declared India as the Republic. Earlier, we were a dominion under the British rule for about 3 years, less than 3 years. The government has announced that there will be a year-long celebration commemorating the 75th year of the adoption of our Constitution. The slogan given was Hamara Samvidhan, Hamara Swabhiman, meaning our Constitution is our pride, a matter of great self-respect for all of us. Let me try to state 3 important facets of this whole journey of our Constitution to substantiate this point about self-respect, why we should feel proud of our Constitution. First is the long struggle that actually led to the stage of making of the Constitution. It's important to know that the making of the Constitution did not suddenly begin in 1946, although the Constituent Assembly was established after towards the end of 1946, December, and it worked for close to 3 years to come out with the final draft. That actually gave a kind of a false reason for some to say that it was a colonial constitution. This constitution was nothing but cut and paste from different countries, and we simply cut and pasted, copied from the 1935 Government of India Act, etc., etc. So first of all, we must remember that a struggle for not less than 25 years preceded the actual stage of making of the Constitution. This is part 1. We should make all of us proud of our Constitution. Second is the very process of making that Constitution itself is a so inspiring saga that if you read the 18 volumes of Constituent Assembly debates, it is such a wonderful, eye-opening kind of literature, kind of discussions that took place during the course of those close to 3 years of constitution making. See, the whole making process itself should make all of us very proud. And third, most important, is the content. What we finally incorporated in that constitution, which was less than 300 articles at the time of its creation. Today it is close to 400 articles, but the whole content itself should make every Indian proud that we could create such a wonderful constitution which probably no other country in the world can be proud of. First, coming to the struggle part of it. As I said, generally we tend to begin any discussion about Constituent Assembly or making of the Constitution from 1946. Or at the most, we go back to 1935 Government of India Act promulgated by the British. But the fact of the matter is, after 1857, the first war of independence, the British had realized that India, a country of India's size, could not be left to a merchant company called East India Company. It had to be taken over by the British government. That was when, for the first time in 1858, they promulgated the Government of India Act for the first time, bringing the governance of India under the sovereignty or suzerainty of the British Queen. In 1919, there was the second effort to bring in a reformed Government of India Act. That was when, for the first time, by then Congress was created, Congress started, rising voice for India's independence and all that. So in 1919, when the British tried to bring a reformed Government of India Act, it was the Congress leadership which firmly opposed that move, saying that any future constitution for India, any rules and regulations that you want to make for India, should be done by the Indians alone. Gandhi was in the forefront opposing that effort of the British. But British went ahead. They had their rules for India based on which they continued to rule over the country. And we all know that at one point, they wanted to again introduce more amendments to that act. When it came up for discussion in the British Parliament, the then Secretary of State, who was handling the affairs of India, Lord Birkenhead, this issue comes up in the British Parliament that Indians are demanding that they only can draft the rules for their country. What should we do? So Birkenhead says, Indians, how can they let them try? If they can come up with some kind of a constitution or some kind of regulations, rules that can guide the government of the country, if they come up with a set of rules under a complete consensus, because Birkenhead knew that by then they had Muslim League in their hands. They knew that consensus was impossible in India. So, in fact, Birkenhead taunts Indians. We will see if you can make a constitution which is acceptable to all the different sections of the country. Then they decide to send Simon Commission, an 11-member commission to talk about constitutional reform in India, but without a single Indian member. Again, Congress says, this is not acceptable to us. Again, the British taunt, okay, if it is not acceptable, come up with your own constitution, but it should be acceptable to all Indians. That was when, in 1928, Congress accepts the challenge and constitutes a committee under Motilal Nehru's leadership. It had Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Jawaharlal Nehru, many members. In fact, there were Muslim League members also in that committee. It's called Nehru Committee. The mandate for Nehru Committee was that you have to accept this challenge of the British, that we can, as Indians, create our own constitution. They come out with a constitution, with a draft, which became famous in history as Nehru Report. The Nehru Report touches upon many aspects that you find in our constitution today. It was the miniature version of our constitution with 80 articles, 80. They went into almost all aspects like fundamental rights, many aspects, electoral college system, election system, everything they went into, came out with a nice draft. But then consensus was still eluding because Muslim League was there to oppose it. So for the British, lack of consensus was an excuse. So finally, they put the condition that, okay, you accept dominion status. Dominion status means you will have your own constitution, a government guided by your own constitution, but you will still be under the suzerainty of the British Queen. Like how today you find countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Let me tell you, Motilal Nehru Committee finally decides to accept that probably as a first step. Let us first become a dominion, which we became in 1947, by the way. In 1947, when we got independence, we actually got the status of a dominion first, because there was some work pending of bringing all the different princely states into the Indian Union. So they offered the dominion status, and Motilal Nehru Committee almost accepted the dominion status. But two youngsters stood up. They said, nothing doing. It should be total independence. No question of this business of, dominion status and British Queen will be ruling over you, still she will be the supreme. Nothing doing, we want nothing short of total independence. These two youngsters were Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, both resigned from the Executive Committee of Congress, protesting against Motilal Nehru's committee's acceptance of dominion status. Then Gandhi intervenes. There was because Lord Irwin was the viceroy. Irwin found a good opportunity in it. Irwin actually pushed very hard to get the British government to agree for the dominion status. Then Gandhi enters into an agreement. There was this Irwin Pact between Gandhi and Irwin, then which finally leads to the two leaders withdrawing their resignation. But in 1929, when the Lahore Congress happened, there Nehru was the president, young. Nehru gets the resolution for total independence passed in that Congress conference in 1929. He was categorical that total independence and nothing short of total independence. In fact, that Congress, Lahore Congress, gives a call to reject all other proposals of the British government. It asks all those governments elected under Government of India Act, there were 78, 80 members elected to provincial legislatures. It asks all of them to resign and announces that 26 January 1930 as the day of independence. You know, why 26 January became the day of our adoption of our constitution was in remembrance of that 1930, 26 January, major protest movement led by the Congress. In 1935, again, the Britishers tried to bring the Government of India Act, a further amended new act to govern India. Again, Congress calls it a slave constitution. The word used was slave constitution. Again, Congress protests vigorously across the country. 1937 elections, Congress takes one very interesting stand at that time though. While in 1929, it asks all its elected members to resign in protest against British refusal to accept Congress' demand. In 1935, while rejecting the Government of India Act promulgated by the British government, it still decides to contest in elections and form governments. The idea was that let us remain in the government under the same act, but sabotage it from within. So when 1939 Second World War began, the Britishers wanted support of the governments in India. Congress says no question. Give us full freedom, then take our support. When they protest, then Congress resigns from the governments. But then Congress persistently raised this issue that India's constitution will be made by us. Finally, in 1946, just before that, Wavell convinces the leadership, British leadership. In 1946, finally, Attlee, when he became the prime minister, he decides that first of all, we have to give independence to India, but also we should accede to this demand that Indians would make their constitution, not we. That's when they ask, the government was formed in 1946, and they asked that government to form the Constituent Assembly. Nehru puts only one condition. He says, this will be 100% Indian assembly. We shall not have any Britisher, any say in our constitution making. That's how, although we were a slave country at that time, when the Constituent Assembly was created with 380 plus members, it did not have a single British member. It was all Indians. Remember that struggle for 20-25 years to insist that it should be our right to create our own constitution. That had finally led to the formation of our Constituent Assembly. Friends, first part was this struggle that should make us proud that we created our Constituent Assembly, and it was we who came forward to make our constitution. Second, the whole making of the constitution itself is again a very fascinating story. As I said, on 26th November 1949, the final draft was ready. But the whole process began 3 years before. It had, as I said, initially, before partition, it had 380 plus members, but Muslim League walked out of the Constituent Assembly. As a result, post the independence, when the Constituent Assembly reconvened, there were 298 members. Originally, Nehru insisted upon direct election to Constituent Assembly, but the situation did not allow that. As a result, they were elected by the provincial legislatures. In 1946, there were elections to 11 provincial legislatures. Those provincial legislatures nominated the members, and then princely states, not all princely states, but 11 of them nominated their members. So it was a mix of princely state representatives and representatives from entire remaining British India. And it deliberated upon various articles of the Constitution for 2 years, 11 months, 18 days. And I must tell you, if you leave aside strife-torn countries like South Africa, Uganda, no other country took so long to make its constitution. It had over 165 days of sittings. 165 days. Romania made its constitution in 9 days. The great USA took only 100 days to finish its constitution. But we took 2 years, 11 months. Not because there was a lot of fighting happening, but the leaders of our Constituent Assembly, right from Nehru to Ambedkar to Patel to many others, they were all thorough Democrats. Unlike now, where parties and members get time allocated, in Constituent Assembly, there was no time allocation. As a result, some members used to give speeches for hours on. But patiently, everybody used to listen. Do you know, out of 165 days, if you take out 30 days, first 30 days was committees discussing about each section. Finally, first draft was presented in the middle of 1947. Remaining working days, close to 115 to 120 working days, were real working days when issue after issue was taken up for discussion. Out of 165 days, if you include committees also, Ambedkar, among the leaders, Ambedkar was the one who spent maximum amount of time sitting in the parliament. He was there for 143 days, despite ill health. Despite the burden of every day, once you finish the debates, discussions, Ambedkar used to sit until 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the night to go through the debates and take important notes from it, so that he, in his speech, could clarify whether he was incorporating that point or not incorporating next day. So he would spend midnight soil to go through, pour over every proceeding of the day. Still, he was always there in the parliament. Second leader, despite his lot of other commitments, going around the world, all those things, was Jawaharlal Nehru, who spent 115 days in the Constituent Assembly. Why I am mentioning is, we need to learn how much seriousness was attached to that parliament. It was not as though some academics sat. In fact, that's what Nehru says. We are not doing any academic exercise here. We are building the future of a great nation here. 7,500 amendments were proposed. 7,500. Some people say that, Ambedkar did not do anything. Everything was done by B.N. Rao and his committee. Of course, B.N. Rao's contribution was very significant. But very significant until the first draft was presented. The first draft was presented in the middle of 1947, for which B.N. Rao did lot of hard work. He went to several countries, studied their constitutions, not to copy-paste, as some people try to propagate, but to understand how the democracies in those countries are functioning. What are the shortcomings? What are the loopholes? So that we don't replicate them in our constitution. So it was such a wonderful exercise. People would say anything and everything. If you read, I had the fortune of reading some volumes of the Constituent Assembly debate. Fascinating. Some people are ever talking. Any subject you give, this gentleman will be there speaking. And he will not speak for less than 2 hours. He will cover the whole history from Vedas to today. But that was allowed. So remember that this whole process of constitution making was itself a great exercise that no other country can claim proud of. We should be proud of that whole exercise. And the third, most important, is the content. As I said, this is not a borrowed content. Firstly, we were very clear about Purna Swaraj. It will be the constitution of a totally independent country. So we shall not have any British remnants in our political structure. As institutions, probably we took some institutions. I'm not denying that. That we can probably discuss in a little while. I will mention a couple of things about that. But broadly, idea was that it should be in the spirit of Purna Swaraj. Number one. Number two, we will have a very quintessentially democratic setup. Now again, let me tell you, this idea that India will be a democracy was essentially Nehru's idea. Nehru actually in 1929 in his presidential speech to Lahore Congress declares categorically that whenever India becomes independent, it shall be only a democratic government. He was very categorical. Nehru was essentially a committed Democrat. So was Ambedkar. So were many others in the constitution. So they introduced true democracy into our through our constitution into our polity. Remember that this content that was created at the time of the constitution making has successfully taken our country forward in the last 75 years. Whereas look at the constitutions of countries. France had how many constitutions? Well, come here, 12. The Fifth Republic was created in 1958 on the basis of the 12th constitution. At least, ma'am was correcting me, at least that is surviving. But whereas we created a constitution, because we created the constitution on the foundations of these strong democratic principles. So much so, as I said, Constituent Assembly debates themselves represent the spirit of true democracy. You can talk anything, everything there. You can make lots of allegations. If you read, you will find people attacking each other. Rajendra Babu was the president of the Constituent Assembly. Rajendra Babu was a gentleman. He would gently, mildly chide people, don't do that. But he had no authority like our Vice President sir or our Speaker sir have today to switch off your mics. So they had that freedom. But that also represented the spirit. And nobody would get angry. They would listen to all the criticism and stand up and answer. Ambedkar would stand up and answer to so many criticisms. But they wouldn't budge. So it's a fascinating journey. One should really go through those proceedings to understand how wonderful that whole making process was, and also the content. As I said, we built a strong democratic structure. There were aberrations. Any country can have aberrations. Two great democracies of the world are India and US. If we had our own emergency between 1975 and 77 as an aberration, US had its aberration on 6th January 2021. There can be aberrations, but broadly speaking, we built a very strong democratic edifice for our country. May I tell you, in 1951, after the constitution was adopted in 1951 in the parliament, there was a proposal for its amendment. Nehru says, no, we in this house, Constituent Assembly, in this parliament have no right to amend it because we are not elected by people. Only the constitution gives the power to amend, but only to those who got elected by people. We were not elected by people. We came through the indirect route. Let first election happen, 1952, then we will see how to amend our constitution. Why I am saying this is, that is the spirit of our constitution, democracy. Then we incorporated fundamental rights into our constitution. But do you know, this whole fundamental rights discourse did not begin in 1948 when United Nations created that UNHCR. If you read Nehru report, it's there. 1928. In fact, they list the rights that they are going to give to people. 15, 20 important rights, including right to property, right to dissent, right of speech. Every right that you find in constitution was already articulated in 1928, 29. So we incorporated fundamental rights. So we built a very strong constitution taking care of the greater unity and future of our country. So the content of it also should make each one of us very proud. So at the end of it, when we talk about Hamara Samvidhan, when we talk about Hamara Swabhiman, it should be a matter of pride that we have such a beautiful constitution which has kept this country united, which has kept this country going. And today also, this country, it looks up to its future based on this great constitution of ours. Having said it, the last part, in just 5 minutes, I mentioned one thing. No constitution will be perfect because societies change, societies progress. As societies progress, constitutions also have to progress, have to also change. Where change is needed, that change should be accepted. That is the reason why in our making of the constitution itself, the provision was introduced that whenever it is required, this constitution can be amended. Do you know that the Canadian constitution cannot be amended? If you want to change it, you have to throw it out and have another constitution. But we are not like that. We allowed constitutional amendment. But if somebody says that certain things have to be amended, they are not anti-constitution. They are not anti-Ambedkar. In fact, in 1953, in the Rajya Sabha, Ambedkar himself says, if you think that this constitution is not serving a given purpose, I will be the first to burn it down. Then somebody says, you are the one who authored it. He says, what can I do? I did what I was mandated to do. But if it is not working, let us burn it down. That doesn't mean Ambedkar was anti-constitution. Ambedkar was not anti-Ambedkar. There were provisions which needed reassessment. I just mentioned a couple of things which needed a relook. For example, in year 2000, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was Prime Minister, a commission was appointed under Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya to look into the functioning of the constitution. Then so much of controversy was created over it. You want to bring Manu, Vad, AO. No, but our own constitution until today underwent 106 amendments. 106 times we amended our constitution. US has not done it. US, in its long history of more than 200 years of its constitution, it amended its constitution only 43 times. In just 75 years, we amended it 106 times. So, at some point, you need certain changes to be incorporated. I will mention a couple of them, just for the sake of our discussion. For example, there was a reference to Article 1 of our Constitution, which defines India's basic geography. You see, India's Constitution begins with a preamble. The preamble describes India. This starts with the sentence, we the people of India, right? Then what is India? Article 1 says, India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. So, if you do some mathematics, we, the people of India, are a union of states, isn't it? Can't we call ourselves a nation? We, the nation of India. Why this came was, the first article of United States Constitution starts with the statement, we, the people of United States of America. But we are, as Bhaswati ji rightly said, we are not a nation that is being created in 1947. We have been a nation existing for millennia. We are adopting this constitution. Could we have said that? We could have said. You may say that you are raking up a non-issue. It's not an issue. Whether you say India or you say nation, one and the same. No. In fact, there was an interesting debate in the Constituent Assembly over this issue. Some people say that why are you saying people of India? Why don't you say nation of India? Ambedkar gives a very interesting reasoning. Ambedkar says, you see, it is easy for me to say that we, the nation of India, but where is that Indian nationhood spirit in our country? We are divided on castes. We are divided on religions. We are divided on provinces, languages. So, we need to inculcate the spirit of one nationhood before we call ourselves a nation. Maybe one may say that this argument is weird or whatever. But that was Ambedkar's logic to say that we just call ourselves only people until we become a nation. That's when, Nehru uses that very famous phrase, we are a nation in the making. Some of us used to contest it. How can you say we are a nation in the making? We have been a nation for millennia. Fact of it is, yes, we have been. But did that nation feeling really exist at the time of our independence? Yeah, largely we have to become free from the British rule was there. But at the same time, we got divided into two nations on the basis of religion. Everywhere we were fighting over religion. There were serious caste issues in our country. So creating one nation was one of the challenges that this constitution has accepted as one of the prime objectives of this constitution was to make a unified nation. Maybe what Nehru meant was we are a nation in remaking. Rashtriya Punarnirman karna hai. Probably something like that. Similarly, this whole debate about fundamental rights. You know, in the Constituent Assembly, a very interesting debate happens over this. There was a kind of a history to it. In 1946, Huxley, who became the head of United Nations Human Rights Commission, he was mandated with drafting the Universal Human Rights Charter. So he was mandated to prepare the Charter of Human Rights that could be applicable to all peoples across the world, irrespective of national entities and all. So he writes to several people asking their opinion. One letter he writes to Nehru also, asking Nehru, can you suggest what rights should people be given? Nehru says, yeah, I am too busy. He was really busy. He was the Prime Minister also, then Constituent Assembly. He says, I am busy, but I have a fellow who has opinion about everything. I will send your letter to him, and he sends it to Gandhi. Rightly so, Gandhi had opinion, views about everything. But what Gandhi says was very interesting. Gandhi replies to Huxley. Gandhi says, this was, Gandhi's greatness. Gandhi writes this reply. He was terribly busy, Gandhi, because he was attending to right victims in Nokhali, in Bihar, in Punjab. He was traveling all over. And Gandhi used to travel by train. Sitting in a train compartment on 25th March 1947, Gandhi writes, I quote, I learned from my illiterate but wise mother that all rights to be deserved and preserved came from duty well done. Thus, the very right to live accrues to us only when we do the duty of citizenship of the world. From this one fundamental statement, perhaps it is easy enough to define the duties of man and woman and correlate every right to some corresponding duty to be first performed. Every other right can be shown to be an assumption hardly worth fighting for. So Gandhi's proposition to the guy in US, Huxley, was, don't talk about rights in isolation. You have to talk about duties also, fundamental duties also. Same debate occurs in the Constituent Assembly. But somehow, in Constituent Assembly, it was decided that, we have to first of all ensure that, we were a slave country, we were denied our rights. First of all, we have to give them fundamental rights. That's how Section 3 of our Constitution granted us fundamental rights. But there was no incorporation of duties in our Constitution in the original draft. In fact, it provokes one Gandhian so much that he stands up and shouts out loudly, where is Gandhi in this? He asks. This is his actual statement. Where is Gandhi in this? Nobody had an answer to that at that time. To her credit, through 42nd Amendment in 1976, Indira Gandhi, during emergency, had tried to introduce 10 fundamental duties in our Constitution. That was when duties were incorporated into our Constitution, inserted into our Constitution under Section 50, Article 51A. But the catch is, they're a part of the directive principles of state policy, which are non-enforceable. This is your duty, but if you don't perform, no punishment. So we need to look at I'm just highlighting a couple of things. Probably we need to look at these things. Now, the challenge comes that in 1973, there was a case called Keshwananda Bharati versus Government of India case in Supreme Court. In that case, Supreme Court had said that you can change anything in the Constitution except the basic structure. Now, what is basic structure? There is no definition. So broadly, what is basic structure? You cannot change, for example, preamble. It is considered basic structure. But you know what preamble says? We are a socialist and secular republic. Where are we socialist? Okay, secular we should always be. I don't say anything. But are we a socialist republic? At least after 1992, we were not a socialist republic. But let me tell you, until 1990, we were. That was Nehru's fad. Nehru used to talk about socialist pattern of society. He created planning commission. By the way, planning commission also was one of the issues in Nehru report, 1929. How much those guys had thought about constitution, understand. So, we said preamble is basic structure. Fundamental rights section is basic structure. Article 1, basic structure. Schedule 1, which mention the names of the states, basic structure. There is no clear definition about it. So we need to probably decide what is basic structure of our constitution, which needs some kind of reform. Not with any ill intention, because this constitution has served our country so well. The democratic institutions that it has created. For example, it created judiciary as an independent institution. Despite so much debate happening over National Judicial Appointments Commission and all that, judicial independence is jealously safeguarded in this country, both by judiciary, but also by the people and the government. So this constitution has so many such great things. But yes, where it is necessary, let's think which new things need to be discussed. That is when it happens. Nobody should say that you are a Manuwadi or you are anti-constitution and by extension you are anti-Ambedkar. No, we have greatest respect for the contributions made by Ambedkar. As I said, some people wrote that Ambedkar did not do anything, but how much hard work. In fact, Ambedkar's health used to be very fragile at that time. It continued to be fragile for next 10 years until his demise in 1956. But still, he had never shown any dereliction of duty as far as constitution making was concerned. So, friends, at the end, let me say only this much. That this again, Ambedkar quotes, Ambedkar said, constitution is at the end of it just a document. It's a piece of paper. What is needed is constitutional morality. Meaning, we must understand the spirit of this constitution and create a political structure that follows that constitutional spirit, which is constitutional morality. So we need to build constitutional morality in our political system so that this constitution continues to guide our nation, continues to keep us one, and continues to encourage our country to progress and prosper. I end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ram Madhavji. Each time you give a lecture, I always feel amazed at the depth of your knowledge. I'd like to add two small things to what you said, which is very important. One is about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I wanted to say that when it was adopted, 2/3 of the world were under colonial rule. So even today, there are many countries which say that how can the Universal Declaration be called universal? Because we were under colonial rule, including the whole of Africa. We participated, as indeed we sent a representative, a lady, to the drafting of the Constitution, yes. The second is the very interesting point you made about what is the basic spirit. So according to international law, of which I'm pretty familiar because of my 6 years in human rights, when we adopt a international instrument, let's say like I negotiated the International Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage while Ambassador of India to UNESCO. International law says that when a country will ratify that instrument, it cannot make a reservation that is against the spirit of that convention. And the spirit of the convention is interpreted in international law as the one issue that is fundamental to that convention. Like, for instance, a country cannot ratify the Convention on Intangible Heritage and say that I reserve the right to destroy my intangible heritage. That is against the spirit of the Constitution. So, in my limited knowledge, not being a lawyer, I would say that the spirit of India's Constitution is democracy and freedom. And any attempt to diminish those guarantees of democracy and freedom, as happened during the emergency, goes against the spirit of our Constitution. There is nothing else but that, in my perspective, which would be deserving of preservation. And what you said about Dr. Ambedkar is amazing, because many of us had a slightly different view because we were not aware of his very important role. And as a speaking now, not just as an Indian but as a Bengali, I feel sorry that Subhash Chandra Bose was not allowed to make his due contribution to the making of that constitution. Subhash Chandra Bose was one of the brightest leaders of the Indian National Congress, but unfortunately, and this actually is a perception which still exists in the south and in the east of India, that when you don't come from the Hindu heartland, the north of India, then sometimes it's difficult to make your views felt and implemented. And what happened to Subhash Chandra Bose actually is a very good example of how the Bengal Congress lost to the All India National Congress based in North India, because I too am a student of history like you are. If you permit, I could open up the floor for a few questions.
But since you mentioned about, this double standards is inbuilt in the institutional system of the Western powers. I told you in 1919, they came out with this Government of India Act second time. That time the Britishers were actively supporting Woodrow Wilson's 14-point agenda. After the First World War, Woodrow Wilson came out with a proposal for creation of League of Nations, first international body. He came out with a 14-point agenda. The first point was national self-determination. Countries should have a right to have self-determination. Britishers were actively supporting Wilson against the Germans. But when it came to India, when Indians said, allow us to draft our constitution, they said no. So this double standard you mentioned about HCR, it is inbuilt in that whole system. Talking about UN Human Rights Commission, one important, very, very significant contribution was, of course, Gandhi's contribution I mentioned about fundamental duties part, but Hansa Mehta was our representative, one of our representatives from India. When the final draft was placed before the House, it started with the statement, all men are born equal. Yes. Hansa Mehta says, no, why only men? Then Eleanor Roosevelt was leading the draft. Roosevelt's wife. Roosevelt passed away, Roosevelt's wife. Eleanor says, no, men includes women. Hansa Mehta says, no. Men and women together are one. Together make the complete. But they don't include women. That's when that was amended to say, all humans are born equal. So, we made some limited contributions, but as you rightly said, we were a slave nation. In fact, we became one of the first signatories of United Nations Organization in 1945 when we were not a free country. First 50 countries included India also. First 50 signatories of UN. But at that time, we were a slave nation. Yeah, sorry. Yes.
We were actually, Madhav, we signed the UN Charter as an enslaved nation. And when the Universal Declaration was adopted, when 2/3 of the world was under colonial rule, it is very significant to note that 3 countries voted against the Universal Declaration because of that change of men and women. Those 3 countries were Saudi Arabia, the former USSR, and apartheid South Africa. These were the 3 countries that voted in the UN General Assembly against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. With your approval, can I take a few questions? Or do we have a mic to pass around?
Yeah.
So we would introduce yourself. Please go ahead. And please make it a quick question because we don't have,
Thank
we
you,
have
sir.
15 minutes.
In the context of emergency, I have one question. Whether the emergency, as you talked that it was an aberration, so whether it was a societal aberration or can it be conveniently painted as a individual aberration and we can just move forward. And also I would like to know your views about the recent decline of parliamentary democracy and what are the constitutional gaps were there that allowed it to happen.
You mentioned that there was often very acrimonious debate in the Constituent Assembly. Were there any major reservations and notes of dissent at the end of the day?
On what, sir?
Any reservations and or notes of dissent on the completion of the Constitution?
The question is, were there any recorded notes of dissent after the adoption of...
Yeah,
Right.
I got it.
And got it. And the third question is over here. And then we'll go for a second round after that.
Steve Rajpurohit. Sir, you talked about constitutional morality, but I think constitution makers chose both the extremes in many cases, like federalism with a centralizing tendency, judicial supremacy but we didn't give judicial supremacy, but not even parliamentary sovereignty. We left it somewhere in limbo. Many such things, fundamental rights, at the same time emergency, not existing in any democratic constitution of the world. So somewhere we didn't took a stand. We gave all the provisions. So what is constitutional morality exactly? How do we define it today? Because we have both the sides.
Would you like to answer these questions?
Yes.
first?
Emergency is certainly a big lesson to all of us that this great constitution can also be subverted by using brute power. So, Dr. Rajendra Prasad's last speech on 26th November 1949 is a worth read. In that, again, he says that, this great constitution, which was prepared after so much hard work and all that, will just be useless if it is not held up by wise men. Men with morals, men with character. Joseph Story was a great American constitutional expert, constitutional attorney, like, Nani Palkewala, you can say in India. Joseph Story's very famous statement was that this great American constitution, although American constitution is a very small constitution, 14, 15 articles. But this great American constitution cannot really protect America if all good men think that politics is a dirty job and stay away from it and scoundrels take over politics. Then this great constitution cannot protect America. These are some lessons that we learned from situations like emergency that we faced. Constitutional provisions were simply subverted. Various tactics were used. So it is actually a lesson for us. Should we learn a lesson? Yes, we all should learn a lesson from those experiences and ensure that we don't repeat those mistakes. So whether today's parliamentary system is grappling with any such problems is something for all of us to see. There is a very interesting joke about China. One guy in China walks up to Xi Jinping and says, "Give us democracy." So Xi Jinping asks him, "Which democracy?" I mean, this was before Trump's election now, but it was a joke before him. He asks, "Is it that American-style democracy where the guy who gets more votes can be denied presidentship? You get more votes, more popular vote, but still you cannot become the prime minister or president? Or the British democracy where you get exactly same number of votes, but yesterday you were in opposition with those votes, today you are the ruling party with exactly same number of votes? Or even worse, the French style, where you get highest number of votes, but the remaining two gang up to deny you that presidentship. Which democracy you want? That guy says, you see, give any democracy. Because there, at least after 5 years, I can change that fellow. The point is, if you find it not working, change it. That's, at least here in this democracy, that provision is there. Sir, as far as this dissent, whether there was any dissent to constitution as a whole, as far as my knowledge goes, no, sir. The last signatures were made on 24th January 1950. The final signatures were made. I mean, remaining members. Actually, kya hai? Not to demean anybody. There was a drafting committee of the constitution. It had 7 members. Except B.N. Rao, nobody else had any interest in that. 2 of them were always abroad. One passed away in the middle. Another 2 would be in their constituency in the south somewhere. They would never turn up for meetings. You know, those who say that Ambedkar did nothing, only draft committee did, must remember that all the hard work was done by B.N. Rao and Ambedkar. Poor, these 2 people had to burn their business oil to make it. So, many wouldn't attend also. But those who attend would talk and talk and talk. There was one R.K. Sidhwa. He spoke for probably one of the longest speaking members was R.K. Sidhwa. He spoke for, I think, more than 1,000 hours. So that went on. But at the end of it, I think everybody had signed on the final draft. There was no dissent, as far as I know. I agree with this observation that there remained some grey areas. Like, separation of powers between judiciary, executive and the legislature. Supposed to be a watertight separation, but it is not. Our executive is under the control of the legislature because minister is the head of the ministry. Minister represents legislature. So we had a system that allows for this kind of question, this kind of issue that did there exist any grey areas when it was being made? Probably yes. That's why the provision that you amend it when you think that you can have a better system. You can have a better arrangement. You do those, you affect those amendments. But broadly speaking, we respected the respective roles of all the different institutions. Except that federalism issue, again, there was a lot of debate in the Constituent Assembly over whether India should become a federal country or a unitary country. Ambedkar was very clear. In fact, he famously states this also, that although we give powers to states, certain powers to states, India shall not be a federal republic. That's why you don't find the word federal in the constitution at all. Having said it, we decided that we should give certain powers to states also. States will enjoy powers. Center will have its own powers. But the overriding authority will remain with the center. Because at that time, given the diversity of the country, given Pakistan's and especially Jinnah's efforts to create more divisions in India, when Congress said that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad will be my president because I don't claim to be representing any one section, Jinnah brought Jogendranath Mandal from Bengal. Said, then if you bring a Muslim as your president, then I will bring a scheduled caste Hindu who will be representing Muslim League. So much of dynamics happened, giving some kind of a view to the leadership at that time that India should be a unitary country. Strong center is required. I come from an ideological background in which we always believed that we needed a strong center with certain rights to states. So are we federal in the sense of that word federal? No. But do we have federal spirit? Yes. This is a very nuanced approach. Yes, that can be called as gray areas which need improvement, but at the end of it, I would only say that while addressing those gray areas, we should not miss the spirit. Spirit is what we said in Article 1, we are a union of states. States are important entities in our political structure. That needs to be respected. We always believed in judicial independence. That needs to be respected. Rest can be debated.
We have time for a few more questions. I just wanted to add a point, Ram Madhavji, if you permit, to the gentleman who asked you whether the emergency was an individual aberration or not. In my perspective, and I was preparing for the Foreign Service exam at that time when emergency was declared, I woke up one morning and opened my morning newspaper, and all the pages of Times of India were blank, and it said on top, "This edition of Times of India has been censored, so there will be no news given because it is not free news." That, in 1975 for me, made me understand that we are no longer a free nation. And therefore, my interpretation is emergency was not an individual aberration. It was both. It was an individual aberration, but the system also let down the nation. Because if the system had not let down the nation, then emergency could not have been declared. That emergency was rolled back by the same person who declared emergency, showed the resilience of the system, that person understood that free India cannot become an enslaved nation again. That is my perception, Ram Madhavji.
Emergency experience. I went to RSS Shaka in the morning. This was 26th June 1975. My father was to join me in the Shaka. He used to come a little late. I went at 6 o'clock. He didn't come. 7 o'clock after Shaka, I went home. My father was not there, and I could see him only after 21 months. He was picked up in the morning. 25th night emergency was declared. 26th morning he was picked up. He was in jail for 21. So it was just not an individual aberration. The whole system misusing or bypassing the constitution. Certain bad things were done at that time. It's a lesson.
Thank you for a very, very interesting foray into history also. And I want to bring it to the present. Which part of the Constitution leads us towards the Viksit Bharat? And one more small question. When was the word secular introduced and what is the relevance?
Second question, please. I think, please pass the mic here and then here.
One criticism, I am Dinesh Sharma. One criticism of Indian Constitution, it is too long. It has been described as paradox, a kind of full of contradictions, too long. Because of that, it creates a lot of problem. Do you think something can be done to make it more precise like the US Constitution?
Greeting Excellencies, my name is Rudraksh Neja. I'm the student of law and a founder of a youth-led think tank called the GeoJurist today. So my question to you as a student of law is, what was the one aim that the Constitution had in mind while framing it? What is the one intent or ideology that our constitutional drafters aim to achieve, like every other successful democracy or at least a developed nation has in mind, either it's communism or it's capitalism? What was the one aim that we had to achieve? Because there are multiple provisions of full of sunshine and rainbows, but what was the one thing that our constitutional drafters had in mind while framing it? What was that one ideology?
Why don't you add, what do you have in mind in answer to your own question? Then he'll answer. What, in your perception, does the Constitution offer Indians? You tell us.
Offers development,
as a law student, tell us.
Right. So of course, ma'am, like as sir also explained, that we have provisions of constitutional morality. It's not a rigid constitution itself. It's a flexible model of constitution. But at least there must be some intent or some ideology framing it that we'll have this mode or this perspective, because everything is flexible in our constitution.
Oh, thank you.
The entire constitution should be the bedrock on which we aspire to build a Viksit Bharat. So not any one part of it, but the whole constitution should be the basis on which we build Viksit Bharat. As far as, because let me just take 2 minutes to say what we mean by Viksit Bharat. You know, developed India, the English equivalent of it. Which country says, I don't want to develop? Every country says, I have to be a developed China, I have to be a developed America. But this may mean different things to different countries. If it is US, it has to be a superpower. It has to be a number one country. Nobody should be there which is above them. I mean, you remember the Sputnik movement in 1957. Just because your Soviets sent one satellite before them, the entire American society was so much depressed. Forcing Kennedy to come forward, don't be depressed, please. We will overtake Russia again. हम तो निश्चिंत बैठते हैं दुनिया में कुछ भी हो जाए. But there is a sentiment. I have to be number one, that's all. That is the idea of Viksit America, if you have to say. For China, it is Middle Kingdom. I have to be superior. That is China's meaning of, a Viksit China. But for us, what is Viksit Bharat? Is it that we have a $50 trillion economy? No, it is fourfold. It has to be a Sangatit Bharat, United India. It has to be a Shashakta Bharat. It's a secure India. It has to be a Samruddha Bharat. It should be a prosperous India. It should be a Sammanit Bharat. It should be a dignified India. The world should respect us. You may not have money, but you are respected. You may not have GDP, but you are respected. So that is what we mean by Viksit Bharat. That is possible only if we follow the spirit of this constitution. Hence, this constitution is very critical to we becoming a Viksit Bharat. Secular, as I said, the word secular and socialist were incorporated or inserted into our constitution through 42nd amendment by Indira Gandhi during emergency in 1976 when there was no opposition in the parliament. Because all opposition leaders were put in jails. At that time, this word secularism was inserted. So, did it mean that constitution makers of our country did not know the importance of word secular? Do you know, very interestingly, again, please go through Constituent Assembly debates. There was this proposal that we should also have the word secularism in the preamble. Nehru stands up to say, Nehru of all, remember. Nehru says, let's not create any confusion. India is by nature secular. But there is a very thin line between traditions and government in India. Traditions and execution, there is a very thin line. So if you insert words like secularism, which are very European in character, there will be a huge confusion in India. Rafale aircraft came in 23. They were first aircraft were delivered in 2023, 5 of them. Our pilots went, learned how to fly them and brought them from Toulouse to Chandigarh. Defense Minister Saab went to receive them. Rajnath Singh ji. Do you know who accompanied him? One Pujari. With some fun lemons and a coconut. He put those lemons under the wheels of those Rafale aircraft and did some puja. Is it secular or communal? Exactly. So, is it secular? My point is it secular or is it a secular act or a non-secular act? Secularism is not the same all over the world, by the way. In France, total separation between religion and state is secularism. Complete separation. State wouldn't have anything to do with religion. But yesterday you saw President Trump taking oath with a bishop in front of him and placing his hand on the Bible. We don't do it in Indian Parliament. We take oath in the name of God, but with constitution in front of you. Not Bhagavad Gita or Quran or something. But they do it in America. So is America a secular country or not? So secularism is not one thing for the whole world. That's why Nehru said, don't create confusion here. Let it be. We are anyway a secular country. By nature. In fact, we are a democratic country by nature. This is what Ambedkar says. Ambedkar gives the example of Bhikkhu Sanghas. He says, Bhikkhu Sanghas had parliament system. Majority, minority voting system. Division used to happen. Division means those ayes are ayes, noes are noes. That used to happen in Bhikkhu Sanghas. He says we are a democracy by temperament. So democracy is very natural. So secularism need not have been inserted, but Indira Gandhi thought that we should have it, we have it. As I said, you can't change preamble. So that's about thing. Constitution, shortening of it. As I said, there are countries which don't have a written constitution. For example, UK doesn't have a written constitution. Israel doesn't have a written constitution. Running. Big country like America has a small constitution. We have a big constitution. Fair enough. As I said, it also represents the true democratic spirit of our country. We accepted every important suggestion and incorporated it in our constitution. It's a matter of pride for us. It's a big country, 140 crore people. Just about that aim, I just wanted to read what Nehru said on the first day when the constitution was being, the drafting of the constitution began. This is what Nehru said. A constituent assembly does not mean a body of people or a gathering of able lawyers who are intent on drawing up a constitution. It means a nation on the move, throwing away the shell of its past political and possibly social structure and fashioning for itself a new garment of its own making. It means the masses of a country in action through their elected representatives. So broadly, aim is that you build a new garment for yourself. You lived under foreign rule for how many centuries now? So many centuries. I mean, Mughals came, then British came. You lived under slavery. Now you are independent. Build a new, vibrant Bharat based on your own civilizational experience, but build a new garment. That was the whole objective of our constitution making. I think that remains relevant to this day also. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to add, Ram Madhavji, about secularism to say that the confusion which was created is that the word secular flows from the French word laïcité, and laïcité in French, as has been explained, is complete separation because it flows from what happened in the French Revolution when the church supported the monarchy against the people of France. And therefore, in France today, a Roman Catholic cannot wear a cross, a Sardar cannot wear his turban because it's regarded as anti-secular. Whereas the definition of secularism, which flows from our age-old, millennia-old traditions, is tolerance and understanding of each other. And unfortunately, when Mrs. Gandhi put in the word secular, she should have put in brackets, in my perception, the Indian variety, so as to distinguish it from what people in the West consider to be laïcité. Laïcité suits the French fine, but they've had problems too, because there are Roman Catholics who don't go to French schools, public schools, because they want to wear the cross. And there was a huge movement 5 years ago in France when the Sikh community diaspora in France protested that they would not permit their sons to remove the turban to go to school because it's an insult to their religion. So it's very complicated. I would like to thank all of you, but in particular Ram Madhavji, and to say that today's debate actually also demonstrates a very glaring difficulty for India to remain democratic, because one of the greatest differences between the American and the Indian education system is that in United States, their constitution is taught in school from the lowest grade to the highest grade. They know each and every right that they have as an American citizen. They know how their constitution was formed. They know about what happened after they had the Civil War. They know how slavery was abolished and its impact, etc. Whereas we in India, we are in a situation where I remember a TV debate a few years ago where there were class 11 students who were asked, what is Gandhiji's full name? Nobody knew. Where was he born? Nobody knew. Which year did we become independent? Nobody knew. So if that is a level of ignorance, because we have moved, and it is very ironic that our constitution says we are socialist, because young India is 100% totally American capitalist. So I think that's one word which could be amended and removed, in my opinion. No, it doesn't apply to me, but it applies to young India. But I really think that we should teach the Constitution in all schools, in whatever language, so that people of India know their rights, they know how the Constitution was formed, they know how we moved from slavery to freedom, because as history has often proved, if you don't know your history, it can always repeat itself. Thank you very much, Ram Madhavji, for coming. It's really nice.